Step back in time to the 1860s and witness history in a way never seen before. These rare Confederate portraits, once faded and forgotten, have been carefully restored and colorized to bring the Civil War era vividly back to life. Each face tells a story of youth, hardship, conviction, and survival, bridging the gap between past and present. This is more than history. It's a window into the lives of those who lived it. Private Pleasant Woodward Hyatt, Company K, 34th Georgia Infantry. Hyatt enlisted on May 13, 1862 at Camp McDonald. He was captured on May 17, 1863 at the Battle of Champions Hill, Mississippi. He contracted typhoid fever and died as a result on June 16, 1863 in Mound City, Illinois, while being held as a POW. Private Charles James Revel, Company C, 59th Georgia Infantry. Revel enlisted on June 22, 1862 at Camp Brown. He was captured on August 22, 1864 during the Second Battle of Deep Bottom, Virginia, but he was soon exchanged. He contracted diarrhea and died on October 11, 1864. Private James M. Dunson, Company D, 35th Georgia Infantry. Dunson entered the military on September 28, 1863 in Atlanta. He was absent sick for an extended period of time, with his last military entry listing him as absent without leave. Private Osborne Jefferson Casey Jr., Company 35th Georgia Infantry. Casey enlisted on August 12, 1861 in Campbell County, Georgia. He died in Richmond, Virginia on October 15, 1861 due to disease. Private Sherman Glass Dixon, Clayton Invincibles, Company E, 30th Georgia Infantry. Dixon enlisted on September 25, 1861 in Jonesboro, Georgia. He was wounded on September 19, 1863 at the Battle of Chickamauga, Georgia. A little less than 2 years later, on February 25, 1865, he was accidentally shot and killed at the Peebles home in Henry County, Georgia, while home on furlough. Major William Alfred Powell, 2nd Georgia Infantry Reserves. Powell first served as a sergeant in the Atlanta Grays, Company K, 8th Georgia Infantry. He enlisted on May 22, 1861 in Atlanta, but was given a medical discharge in February 1862. On May 7, 1864, he enlisted once again and served as the regimental major of the 2nd Georgia Infantry Reserves, who served as guards at Andersonville Prison. Powell survived the war and worked as a merchant and church elder. He died in 1906 and is buried in Atlanta. Private Hugh Lawson Duncan, Company K, 39th Georgia Infantry. Duncan enlisted on March 10, 1862 in Lafayette, Georgia. He became a POW when Vicksburg capitulated to federal forces in July 1863, but was soon paroled. He was surrendered in North Carolina in 1865. Duncan died in 1909 and is buried in Walker County, Georgia. First Sergeant Jasper Newton Allen and Private Thomas J. Allen, Company I, 49th Georgia Infantry. Jasper enlisted as a private on March 4, 1862 in Sparta, Georgia. He was wounded in May 1864 during the Wilderness Campaign. He was captured on April 3, 1865, and in the war for him. Thomas entered the military in 1863 and served until the end of the war and was paroled at Appomattox in April 1865. Private IVW, Duggan, Company K, 15th Georgia Infantry. Duggan enlisted on July 15, 1861 in Sparta, Georgia. By December 1861, he was sick with pneumonia. He later transferred to the 49th Georgia Infantry in the early summer of 1862 and served as a quartermaster sergeant. It appears he was absent on furlough when the war ended. First Sergeant Russell M. Cassidy, Company G, 9th Georgia Infantry. Cassidy enlisted on June 12, 1861 in Walker County, Georgia. He was wounded during the Second Manassas Campaign in August 1862. He was wounded again, suffering a gunshot wound to the left leg on June 19, 1864 at Petersburg, Virginia. It appears he was absent on wounded furlough towards the end of the war. Private George W. Bath, Company I, 9th Georgia Infantry. Bath enlisted on June 10, 1861 in Statesboro, Georgia. Early in his enlistment, he served as a teamster. He was wounded on August 28, 1862 at the Battle of Second Manassas, but recovered. He was captured on July 2, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, and was held as a POW until February 1865, when he was exchanged. Private Robert A. Wood, Company B, 9th Georgia Infantry, Wood enlisted on June 12, 1861 in Summerville, Georgia. He was wounded on July 2, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, and was captured on July 5, 1863, suffering a gunshot wound to the hip and groin. Those wounds disabled him for the remainder of the war. He was paroled in Talladega, Alabama at the end of the war. Private Daniel McEachern, Company I, 10th Georgia Infantry. McEachern enlisted on May 27, 1861 in Fayetteville, Georgia. He died on June 26, 1862 near Richmond, but it is unclear if his death was due to disease or combat. Private James Harris Blanchard, Thomas Guards, Company F, 10th Georgia Infantry. Blanchard enlisted on May 11, 1861 in Columbia County, Georgia. He was wounded and captured on September 17, 1862 at the Battle of Sharpsburg. He was later exchanged and given a medical furlough, but he has no further military records beyond that point. Blanchard survived the war, died in 1901, and is buried in Columbia County, Georgia. Private William Thomas Roberts, Company E, 10th Georgia Infantry. Roberts enlisted on May 20th, 1861 in Jonesboro, Clayton County, Georgia. He immediately became sick and died in Virginia soon afterwards. Private James David Means, Company A, 5th Georgia Infantry Reserves. Means was 17 years old when he entered the military on April 17, 1863 in Macon, Georgia. He died on November 19, 1864 in Houston County, Georgia. Lieutenant George W. Wood, Fannin Guards, Company B, 60th Georgia Infantry. Wood enlisted in Dalton, Georgia on September 19, 1861. He was mortally wounded, shot in the lungs and in the liver, on July 3, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, and died as a result of his wounds on July 23, 1863 in Gettysburg. Private Jesse Monroe Penley, Company C, Phillips Legion Georgia Infantry. Penley, born in Marietta, Georgia, enlisted on March 1, 1862. He was wounded on July 2, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg. He was sick in 1864 and was paroled in 1865 in North Carolina, so he was not with his regiment when it surrendered. Penley later moved to Alabama and died in 1909 in Walker County, Alabama. Private Robert R. Brown, Sumner Light Guards, Company K, 4th Georgia Infantry. Brown enlisted in the 4th Georgia Infantry in April 1861. In 1864, he transferred to Company D, 11th Battalion Georgia Artillery. He served as a courier for General W. N. Pendleton in 1865, and he surrendered at Appomattox in April 1865. First Lieutenant Irby Goodwin Scott, Company G, 12th Georgia Infantry. Scott enlisted as a private on June 15, 1861 in Eatonton, Georgia, and eventually became first lieutenant. He was wounded on August 27, 1862 during the Second Manassas Campaign. He recovered and returned to his regiment. Scott was surrendered at Appomattox in April 1865. Second Sergeant Thomas Jefferson Cawthon, Company B, 53rd Georgia Infantry. Cawthon enlisted on May 1st, 1862 as a private and eventually became second sergeant. He was killed on November 29, 1863 in the assault on Fort Saunders during the Battle of Knoxville, Tennessee. Sergeant James Thomas Cochran, Company D, Cobb's Legion Georgia Cavalry. Cochran enlisted on August 10, 1861 in Albany, Georgia. Aside from a few instances of sickness, he was present for the entire war. He was captured in Athens, Georgia in 1865. Cochrane died between 1884 and 1889. Private Ethelbert Pendleton Bedell, Company C, Cobb's Legion, Georgia Cavalry. Bedell enlisted on August 1st, 1861 in Athens, Georgia. He was given a discharge from the military for unspecified reasons on August 20th, 1862. Bedell died on December 4th, 1864 in Burke County, Georgia. Sergeant William Struppa, musician, Company I, 5th Georgia Infantry. Struppa enlisted on May 11, 1861. He was paroled in Greensboro, North Carolina in 1865. Second Lieutenant Samuel Augustus Birney, Company G, Cobb's Georgia Legion. Birney enlisted as a private in June 1862 and was later elected second lieutenant. He was wounded and disabled in 1864 and was placed on detached service in East Tennessee gathering cattle, then working in Georgia with the Postal Service. He was captured and paroled by the 10th Michigan Cavalry in 1865 at the end of the war. Private James A. Ogletree, Star Volunteers, Company I, 13th Georgia Infantry. Ogletree, from Spalding County, Georgia, enlisted on July 8, 1861. He was mortally wounded on September 17, 1862 at the Battle of Sharpsburg and died as a result of those wounds on September 21st, 1862 in Sharpsburg. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the Civil War South. If these restored portraits moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more history reimagined in color.